diuretic, or diuretic.
Hold
Oh,
on, hold on. Okay.
Preventing, yes.
All right, so, and see, it's difficult for you to really truly understand this concept, but this concept is important because it's going to come back to us when we move into the chapter about the kidneys, okay? So, when we begin to affect blood pressure, we will affect areas of the heart. The blood volume, for example, will be affected. The stroke of the heart will be affected. If we affect that, we're going to affect the respiratory system. If we affect the respiratory system, we're going to affect the kidneys. If I affect my heart, I'm going to affect my digestive system. If I'm affecting all of these systems, what have I just done to every single tissue in my body? I have affected them. This is not a simple hormone. It is not a simple concept for this hormone, which is why this hormone and this action is going to come back to us and the rest of the systems that we look at. Now, another thing that has to happen, well, let's finish the blood pressure. Okay, so when the blood pressure decreases, this means that we are affecting the volume of the blood in the body, and we are affecting the ability of it to move within the body. To make sure that we maintain the proper flow of blood to the tissues that's needed, especially the brain, if the ADH can decrease the output of urine, that means we maintain the water, the fluid that's in our bodies, which will build up the volume of the blood, therefore affect the output of the heart as well as the stroke and raise the blood pressure, getting the fluids to the tissues of the body. Therefore, if a blood pressure decrease occurs, the body needs to conserve water. And that's why urine output decreases. Does that make sense?
If it decreases, the body needs to conserve water.
If blood pressure is low, to raise blood pressure back up, we need to conserve the water, and therefore it's not going to have it go through and become urine. It's going to return it back and build up the water in the fluids.
So is that why when people are in renal failure, they don't eat?
It could be, yes. It could be. Renal failure is going to be the issue where their kidneys' function has decreased. And so it could be a relationship to blood pressure, but the
They all
biggest
have low blood
the
pressure.
biggest factor that happens, with the renal disease is the fact that the kidney function decreases to a point where sometimes it just completely stops. And when it gets to a certain point in the decrease of the function of the kidney, that's when they need to begin dialysis. Because if they don't, all of the toxins are being built up in the blood and we're not getting rid of any of that stuff, okay? And so that's where, they're going to have the dialysis, depending on certain cases, the kidney transplant, that sort of thing. And you can live successfully with one kidney. It's not a problem. Trust me on that, okay? Now, another way that the ADH works, picking up the information and the making of the ADH and so forth, the osmoreceptors. Do any of y'all remember osmolarity or osmolality? We briefly talked about it, I think in chapter 2, maybe. And this is that concentration of materials in the fluids. All right? We have, once again, something that's going to monitor this concentration within the fluids, concentration of molecules. Okay? So, the osmolality, okay, where are we finding information getting picked up? Hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus has a direct connection to the posterior pituitary, which is responsible for ADH. So, it can help to monitor the fluid, okay? Now, check to see this right here. Concentration of electrolytes increases. Okay? Or if the concentration of water decreases. ADH gets secreted. Let's look at this logically, okay? Now, if I'm going to look at a fluid, and remember, ADH production is to prevent large outputs of urine, right? So if I'm going to look at a fluid's going to have water in it. But now my electrolytes are high. Give me an example of an electrolyte.
Sodium.
Sodium. Now, if those let's say sodium, potassium, magnesium, zinc, got my picture? So at this point, these are my salts. Is that correct? So at this point, salts are high, water is what?
Low.
My water content in this situation right here is low. So if I can prevent large outputs of urine, I'm going to put water content back into my fluids. And if I can put water content back into my fluids, can we not hopefully balance those electrolytes?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So over here, if my water content is low, once again, I need to put water back into my solution to balance what it's carrying as the fluids in the body. Does that make sense? Morgan?
I understand that, but like when people are dehydrated, usually their potassium's high.
Right, because if they're dehydrated, they have lost their water content, and therefore that electrolyte goes up.
That's what you're saying there, right?
And so therefore potassium levels would be high.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so if you rehydrate, now, here's the thing, just a little offside, okay, about rehydration. Unless you have done an Olympic sport, rehydrate with water. do not rehydrate with all these aids, like the Powerade, the Gatorade, or whatever else they've created out there. Because if you have dehydrated, that's already telling you salt content is going to be a little bit higher. And if those drinks contain electrolytes and water, you're still not putting enough water into the system. Does that make sense?
And so you're saying it would be okay for an Olympic runner to drink Powerade or something?
Yes. If you are doing something on the level of an Olympian, maybe a pro football player, maybe like wrestling, basketball, you would probably want to rehydrate with something, but only to a certain extent. In other words, don't let that be the only thing. Drink, some of it, but then follow with some water.
So, here's what I'm confused about, and I don't know why we started doing this. My daughter played golf, and she'd be in tournaments, walking, carrying a heavy bag, obviously not in the Olympics doing anything fast and hard.
Heat?
Yes, I was going to say, because it'd be like 105. And one
Yeah.
hole she'd drink Gatorade, the next hole she'd drink water.
Good.
And she would never have to urinate for 5 hours.
When the body is under that type of stress, where the output of sweat, because if you notice, everything I mentioned would be an extreme situation of sweat.
And she'd be
being
totally wet
produced.
by the end of the round.
Yes. There is no water left in the body. So the kidneys will decrease their output.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is really kind of cool. So, ADH makes sense? All right. So how is it that we're going to control ADH secretion? And this, I think, begins on page 637 of your textbook. Note that when we have the posterior pituitary, the ADH, if it gets secreted. All right, first of all, let's come over here and let's say osmoreceptors pick up some information, which is what they're kind of trying to show you over here. They're trying to show you information that might get picked up by the baroreceptors, okay? Now, if there's a change in osmolality, or if there's a change in the blood pressure, that's going to start the action potential in the hypothalamus. Now remember, the cell bodies located in the hypothalamus, they have to pass their action potential by way of the axon. Okay? So, it'll start the action potential that will occur, all right? And that action potential will travel by axons, from that hypothalamus. Now, if there's the opposite that occurs, if we have an increase in osmolality, decrease in blood pressure, we can have potentials get fired. Now, once those action potentials get started and they begin to pass by way of their axons, and if they make it to the tissue that's going to help with the ADH production, okay? The secreting neurons for ADH are going to pass through that tract to the posterior pituitary. So we've got that action potential from the hypothalamus traveling to the posterior pituitary. Now, because it's an action potential, and when it reaches the ends, and we're at those terminal buds, it's going to release its neurotransmitter. So that neurotransmitter is going to get released, all right? The action that will occur for the tissue in the posterior pituitary, that is going to generate the release